He tried to cheat on me, a tangled web of love, trauma, and breaking points, Chapter 1, where it all began, a fragile happiness. My name is Robyn, and I'm 25 years old. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be wrestling with betrayal and heartbreak, I wouldn't have believed it. Back then, I was simply happy, albeit in a fragile, uncertain way. You see, I was with this man Aris, who was 5 years older than me, turning 30. He had a magnetic personality, the kind that drew people close with his laid-back charm. He had a slight bohemian vibe, playing the guitar at open mic nights, swirling red wine in a chipped mug while talking about life. When we started dating, I was enthralled. Before Aris, I'd never seriously considered marriage. My trans identity, mental health struggles, and complicated family history left me wary of letting someone in. But Aris seemed to accept me wholeheartedly. He never flinched when I explained I was trans. He even gave me advice on picking out outfits that made me feel confident. We talked about the future, traveling together, moving somewhere by the ocean. I felt safe in those fantasies. We spent a lot of time at the cozy apartment we shared. I had moved in about 8 months into our relationship because it felt natural. We'd cook experimental vegan meals, his idea, and lounge in the living room, half-dressed, watching random documentaries. He'd occasionally go out for gigs, singing soulful ballads or comedic parodies. I always tried to support him, rearranging my own schedule so I could be in the audience, cheering him on. Yet from the beginning, there were signs that Aris had scars from the past. He'd mention an ex who cheated on him, and how the betrayal plunged him into depression. He'd said, "He can't go through that heartbreak again." I remember I promised him I'd never do that. The irony is, he's the one who eventually tried to cheat on me. But I'll get to that soon. I wish I could say our relationship was smooth sailing, but 2 months after I moved in, I lost my job. The stress of it weighed on me heavily. I was fighting with insurance agencies for some coverage, dealing with unemployment checks, and I guess I got moody, easily triggered. Aris initially was supportive, telling me to take my time job hunting, but after a while he started complaining that my arguments with bureaucrats brought negative energy. I tried to brush it off, but a wedge formed between us. We bickered more. Then, near the tail end of our relationship, everything exploded. He did something I can't unsee, and my reaction ended up overshadowing his wrongdoing. Chapter 2: Snapchat Confusion and Old Lies. It started with a small hint one morning. I was tidying up the kitchen when Aris Snapchatted me. The messages arrived with a 3-second timer, disappearing before I could fully read them. Normally, his snaps to me were indefinite, or at least 10 seconds. My stomach twinged. I asked him why he set them for only 3 seconds. He insisted it was a phone glitch, claiming his screen overheated. I eyed him suspiciously. "A glitch," I repeated. He raised his hand, swearing he'd never lie to me again, referencing some earlier fibs he'd told about his ex. That was the first major crack. He'd once lied about picking up an item for me, but giving it to his ex, swearing me to secrecy about the whole fiasco. We'd had multiple arguments about his ex. There were nudes exchanged, alt Twitters, hidden communications. He always apologized, saying it wouldn't happen again. I believed him each time because I was determined to trust him. In that moment, seeing that suspicious 3-second snap, I recalled all those past half-truths, and a pit of dread formed in my chest. That night, he texted me. "He'll be home late from work. Might we get food together after?" I said yes, excited at the prospect of a late-night outing. I stayed up until nearly 3 a.m., too anxious to sleep. He waltzed in, found me wide awake, and was all over me, physically affectionate to the point it felt forced. Then he dropped the bomb. I did something well. I tried something. I froze in confusion. He confessed that earlier that morning, while I was literally in the next room on a Zoom therapy call, he decided to take a photo of his arse to send to a guy he'd been pining over for years. Some straight guy he was apparently fixated on. He claimed he didn't actually send it, but that he came close. My heart pounded. So you were about to cheat on me, basically, right? Sexting someone else while I was next door. He stammered some excuse about craving attention, about how it didn't mean anything. We argued, cried, volleyed accusations. I asked how I could trust he didn't actually send it. He swore on everything that he backed out. But I didn't believe him. It sounded like a carefully worded lie. By morning, we were both exhausted, resentful, barely functioning. He promised he'd never do it again. My mind spun with the knowledge that if he was trying to cheat, maybe he was already effectively cheating. My chest felt tight with betrayal, but I also felt an irrational urge to fix it. I told him we needed to talk more, to figure out why he sought another man's validation. He nodded, half-dazed. Then, the next day, he vanished to stay with his family, ignoring my calls. Chapter 3. The party I almost didn't attend. I was supposed to go to my friend's house for a casual party that weekend. A day after this fiasco, Aris insisted on dropping me off. On the drive there, he held my hand, told me he loved me, repeated that he was sorry. I was raw with emotion, not sure what to believe. Once I got to my friend's place, I tried to distract myself with drinks and conversation. But my mind kept wandering. He tried to cheat, or maybe did cheat. Why is the focus now on my reaction? Later that night, I told Aris via text that I might stay over at my friend's to avoid tension at home. He texted back calmly, "That's fine, I'm going to my parents' anyway." Something in me snapped. He's running from confrontation. I tried calling to talk, but he wouldn't pick up. My calls went to voicemail. Anxiety bubbled. I was slightly drunk, enough to feel brave but also volatile. I ended up yelling at him through voice messages, calling him selfish, inconsiderate, avoidant. When he finally answered, I roared at him about how he's repeating the same patterns. Why do you hide whenever something big happens? He was dismissive, telling me to calm down. I found out later his sister sat next to him, recording me, coaching him on what to say. That stung. He was turning my meltdown into an exhibit of my craziness. I eventually tried to go home, only to realize I forgot my keys. I called him, texted him, asked him to let me in. He ignored me. His phone was off. So I sat on the sidewalk outside our apartment from 3 a.m. Until about 8, drunk, cold, crying. Finally, his family arrived with a spare key, letting me in. That humiliating experience is seared in my memory. I was the one locked out, while he painted me as an unstable partner for lashing out. The fact that he attempted to cheat seemed overshadowed by my reaction. Chapter 4, the breakup and the blame game. Days later, we tried to talk. Each conversation ended in him making it all about my angry outburst, ignoring the core issue, his attempt at cheating. He'd say, "You threatened to come to my parents' place. My sister recorded your meltdown. You're out of control." When I'd retort, "You tried to cheat on me. Are we ignoring that?" He'd shrug. "You're focusing on old news. Look at how you behaved." I realized with a sinking heart that no matter how I approached it, he refused accountability. He repeated lines like, "I might have made a mistake, but your reaction was abusive." He also hammered how my job loss and mental state caused him stress, implying that's why he strayed. I felt guilty, wondering if I was indeed the cause. If I hadn't lost my job, if I hadn't argued with the insurance folks in front of him, maybe he wouldn't do this. One morning, I decided I couldn't handle the emotional turmoil. I told him we were done. He shrugged, saying, "Fine. If you can't handle your own anger, I'm not staying." So we separated. But ironically, even after the breakup, the drama didn't end. Because I was still in love with him, still craving closure. He left me reeling, as if I was the villain for reacting strongly to his betrayal. It twisted my sense of right and wrong. Chapter 5, Remembering the Past Deceptions. In the aftermath of our separation, I reflected on the entire relationship. I remembered how, 4 months into dating, he lied about an ex contacting him. Then I discovered text logs. He'd actually been exchanging nudes with that ex. I confronted him. He apologized with teary eyes, promising never again. I forgave him because I believed he'd change. Later, I found out he'd followed that ex's alt Twitter, seeing explicit posts. I asked him to unfollow, which he did grudgingly. But behind my back, he'd still checked the ex's content. Another time, he'd given me a small item as a gift. Then I found out he'd actually gotten it from that same ex, or given it to the ex first. Some weird story he twisted. Over 14 months, he lied repeatedly about that scenario. Each time I uncovered a new piece, he'd feign ignorance or say it was old news. I kept giving him chances, rationalizing that everyone has baggage. But deep down, it established a pattern. He was comfortable lying to me. So maybe it's no surprise he tried to cheat with a random, straight guy, or possibly multiple men. The signs were there all along. Chapter 6, Self-Blame and Shame. I've spent the last couple weeks, since the breakup, wallowing in self-blame. If only I hadn't yelled at him that night. Or, if only I'd been calmer, he might have listened to me about the cheating attempt. Instead, the focus shifted to my meltdown. Could I have controlled my anger better? Possibly. But does that excuse his betrayal? Absolutely not. I also recall how I tried to fix things in other ways. Cooking, cleaning, washing all his clothes. Adjusting my schedule to attend his gigs, showing up with homemade lunches. I hoped that if I showed more kindness, he'd reciprocate. But that's not how emotional affairs or dishonesty works. My therapist explained that no matter how perfect I tried to be, if someone's set on lying or cheating, they will. Still, a pang of regret remains. Could I have done more? His manipulative tactic of flipping the blame is something I see clearly now. He'd say, "Look at what you did, how you reacted," to distract from his wrongdoing. So I internalized guilt, thinking I was the monster. Only after days of reflection do I realize that reacting with anger to betrayal is normal. Sure, I might have handled it better, but the root cause was his action, not mine. Chapter 7, Sleeping with him again, and further confusion. About a week after our breakup, he randomly popped over to pick up some clothes he left. We ended up talking, tears in our eyes, hugging. One thing led to another, and we had sex. It was a mistake in hindsight, but in the moment I felt that old spark, that sense of comfort. He whispered how he missed me, how some of his clothes still smelled like me, how he'd gotten off thinking about us. My heart soared with false hope. The next morning he left again, claiming he needed space. I was left reeling, even more confused. Did we just reconcile? Or was that a one-night post-breakup fling? He texted me afterward, "We love you, but things are complicated." I wanted to scream. They're complicated because you tried to cheat. And now you're toying with my feelings. He admitted he felt depressed, borderline suicidal. My sympathy flared. I still love him, but also recognized it as a possible manipulation tactic. He's used emotional distress as a shield before, preventing me from confronting issues. A friend told me, Be careful, he might be using your empathy to reel you back in. That's a chilling thought, because the last thing I want is to be manipulated. But also, I can't ignore if he's truly in crisis. My guilt about abandoning. A suicidal man is immense, yet can I sacrifice my mental health again for him? Chapter A. The Toy App Sexting Revelation. As if all that weren't enough, I discovered he was also using an app designed to control a certain sex toy we once bought as a couple's experiment. Initially, it was a playful thing for us to share intimacy at a distance. But apparently, after we broke up, he used that same app to sext or control the toy with other people. I felt sick when I learned it from a mutual acquaintance. It confirmed he was actively exploring sexual connections beyond me. The entire straight guy fiasco might just be the tip of the iceberg. I confronted him about it. He responded with a shrug. We're broken up, so what does it matter? That casual dismissal hurt like a punch. He'd do anything to dodge accountability. Our final blowout came when I told him I'd no longer talk to him at all. He tried to defend himself with claims of depression, telling me how low he felt, implying he needed me. I felt torn between compassion and self-preservation. Chapter 9, Going No Contact. Ultimately, I chose to cut contact. I blocked his number, unfriended him on social media, told mutual friends I needed space. He tried one last time to schedule a coffee meeting, but I refused after he showed me with an excuse about helping parents renovate a kitchen. Because there were bricks where they shouldn't be. I saw it as him being avoidant yet again, so I drew the line. No more illusions. Now I'm alone, processing heartbreak, grappling with conflicting emotions. I'm terrified he might actually harm himself because he's threatened self-harm before. But every time I caved in out of worry, he used that to shift blame. My friends told me to remember that I can't fix him or be responsible for his mental health. He's an adult. If he truly needs help, he should seek professional therapy, not sabotage me. Still, the sadness weighs heavily. The thought of never speaking to him again stings. We shared so many tender memories in that apartment. The silly dance-offs, the nights we giggled over wine, the times he claimed I was his rock. Yet I can't forget how he tried to cheat, how he twisted the narrative so my reaction overshadowed his betrayal. I'm caught between yearning for closure and knowing it's best to move on. Chapter 10, Remembering My Own Identity. A trans perspective. Part of what hurts is how he outed me as trans to some of his friends without my consent. It happened at a wedding months ago. He was tipsy, pointing at me, telling them about my surgery scars. I stood there, mortified, wanting the ground to swallow me. Later, when I asked for space to process that violation, he and his sister literally followed me around, ignoring my boundaries. Reflecting on it, I see it as another sign of disrespect. He never fully valued my comfort or privacy, the same way he disrespected me in other ways. Despite that, I tried to rationalize his behavior. I told myself love meant tolerating small humiliations, but was it truly love on his end, or just convenience? Because someone who truly cherishes me wouldn't parade my personal scars in front of strangers, nor claim that my meltdown overshadowed his attempted infidelity. They'd apologize and work to heal the trust. Instead, he gaslit me into believing I was the problem. I recall how, at one point, I thought we'd build a future, maybe even get married in a state or country that recognized my identity fully. Now, that dream lies in ruins. But I'm determined not to let this heartbreak define my sense of self-worth. I've been through challenges before. Transitioning, dealing with family ignorance, job struggles. I'll survive this too. Chapter 11, Seeking Therapy and Self-Healing. After going no contact, I realized I needed professional help to navigate my turmoil. I found a new therapist, one who specialized in relationship trauma. In our first session, I sobbed, unloading all the baggage, the try to cheat, fiasco, his manipulative blame, shifting my meltdown, my fear for his mental health, my guilt. She listened calmly, then told me something that resonated. Sometimes, you're forced into a defensive stance by someone else's betrayal. Your anger might have been intense, but it was a reaction to emotional violence done to you. That perspective soothed me slightly. I wasn't a monster for yelling or being angry. I was a human in pain. She also reminded me that I can't shoulder the guilt for someone else's suicidal threats. If he's mentally unwell, he needs professional help, not a scapegoat. Over subsequent sessions, we worked on self-compassion, focusing on how to build a new life beyond him. The therapist recommended journaling daily, writing letters I'd never send, exploring how my trans identity might factor into my willingness to endure mistreatment. Opening stuff. Chapter 12, Flashbacks and Relapse of Emotions. One random Tuesday, a month after no contact, I had a severe emotional flashback. I was grocery shopping, saw a brand of cereal he loved, and I nearly broke down in tears. The memory of his laughter as we made midnight cereal runs for fun slapped me in the face. I clutched the cart, breathing heavily to avoid a panic attack. People stared. I forced a smile, blinking back tears, reminding myself, "You tried to cheat. This is the man who lied repeatedly." But my heart still missed the illusions of our good times. Some nights I dream of him returning, confessing his wrongdoing, taking accountability. In these dreams we reconcile, he gets therapy, and we rebuild. I wake up with a hollow H, realizing it's just fantasy, because in reality he pinned everything on me, refusing to own his betrayal. The heartbreak is that I truly loved him, believed in him, only to watch him sabotage us. Chapter 13, Insights from Friends and Family. My close friend Camilla came by one weekend, armed with snacks and tissues, determined to help me move forward. She told me bluntly, "You never owned up, never apologized properly, so you're stuck with unprocessed anger. You deserve better." She also pointed out how manipulative it was to overshadow cheating with the partner's reaction. "That's classic deflection," she said. Another friend, Jared, reminded me. "He had a track record of lies from the start. You gave him chance after chance." True. I realized how eager I was for love that I let boundaries slip. My mother, upon hearing the gist, scolded me for ignoring red flags. She was worried for my emotional state, but proud I eventually broke away. Hearing all these perspectives reaffirmed that yes, I made mistakes in how I responded, but it doesn't absolve him of wrongdoing. He tried to cheat, that's the root cause. My meltdown was a reaction, not the primary sin. Each conversation helps me see clarity in the chaos. Chapter 14, Life After Him. Rebuilding myself, months have passed, and I'm finding new routines. My job search finally bore fruit. I landed a position at a marketing firm. The steady paycheck helps me breathe. I started hitting the gym, not for vanity but for mental clarity. It's amazing how physical movement can release pent-up stress. Sometimes I see glimpses of him on social media if a mutual friend posts a group photo. I ignore it. My therapist says if I sense a relapse of longing or guilt, do grounding exercises. So far, it's working. I'm not fine, but I'm better than I was. The quiet in my apartment sometimes feels lonely, but it's also peaceful. No tension, no secrets. I fill the space with music and little crafts, learning to enjoy my own company. My trans journey continues, step by step. Without him overshadowing me, I explore new ways to express my gender. Freed from his subtle judgments, I find fresh confidence. I might date again eventually, But for now, I'm content focusing on self-discovery. I refuse to compromise my worth or self-respect for anyone. That's the vow I made after I left him. Chapter 15 Conclusion. What I've learned, standing here now, older and wiser from these experiences, I reflect on the entire saga. He tried to cheat on me, or more accurately, he likely did cheat, just not fully caught in the act. He took zero accountability, flipping the script to make me feel like my reaction was the main problem. I lost my composure that night. Yes, but only because I was dealing with raw betrayal. I see now how manipulative partners exploit your emotional response to hide their wrongdoing. It's heartbreaking how love can blind us to glaring truths, from the first lies to the suspicious phone usage, to the final revelation that he was sending explicit pictures. I clung to illusions, hoping we could salvage something, but illusions shatter under the weight of repeated lies. Breaking up was agonizing, especially with him using mental health pleas, but preserving my own sanity meant severing ties. For anyone reading my story, I hope they see that reacting with anger to betrayal doesn't erase the betrayal itself. Don't let someone shift the focus from "they cheated" to "you got mad." If you're grappling with guilt over an emotional meltdown, remember that heartbreak stirs intense feelings. It doesn't justify the meltdown, but it also doesn't absolve the betrayer. Healing starts when you stop blaming yourself for their choices. Now, I stand on my own, determined to create a future free from toxic compromise. My heartbreak transformed into resilience. I might always miss the dream of what we could have been. But I'm learning to love myself more fully. I'm worthy of a partner who owns their actions, cherishes my trust, and doesn't cloak their misdeeds behind my emotional reactions. That's the biggest takeaway. I can't change him, but I can refuse to let his betrayal define me. And that's precisely what I'm doing.